The first thing she was asked, of course, is about revenge and retaliation. And the comment that she made was, no real mother would want this to happen to another mother. Don't talk to me about revenge. Motherhood is a uniting force. It cuts through religion. It cuts through any differences that might exist between us. And if she's anything above all, she is a mother. She's got 3 other boys, wonderful boys. And the second thing she said was, my government is responsible. My government brought these 2 young men to such a level of despair that they would take their own lives and take the lives of other innocent people, including a 13-year-old girl. The brutal oppression under which the Palestinians have to live because of us is the cause of this. That is why this is happening. If we want this to happen, we have to lift the oppression. As long as Palestinians are denied hope, and denied freedom, and denied water, and denied their land and their homes, this will continue to happen. I point a finger at my own government. And interestingly enough, Bibi Netanyahu, who's today Prime Minister, was Prime Minister then as well. He also used to be a close personal friend of my sister because they went to school together in Jerusalem. That's a whole other side story. So then I came back, you know, the 7 days of mourning that we Jews keep, you know, were over, and I had to come back. I lived here in America already, and you have to go to work the next day, and how do you do this? But somehow what my sister said put me on a path, and I decided, okay, it's time to do something. Because she became very outspoken. And her husband, Rami, became very outspoken, as some of you, I think, know, some of you have heard him here, about the need for reconciliation and the need to allow the Palestinians their rights and freedoms. I was lucky enough that in San Diego I met a group of people. It was a Jewish-Palestinian dialogue group. It took me some time to find them, and it took me some time to understand what I was going to do. And what was interesting was, I was 39 years old. I was here in the United States. And that was the very first time I ever met Palestinians. I grew up in Jerusalem. I was born and raised in Jerusalem, a mixed city. The first time I ever sat with Palestinians in a normal setting as completely equal people was here in the United States. Because even though Jerusalem is, you know, so-called united and so on, it's completely segregated. So an Israeli boy does not meet Palestinians. I mean, you might see them doing landscaping or, you know, washing dishes. And then I began hearing all these stories that I'd never heard before. This was a dialogue group, so it was not about, you know, accusing or arguing. Everybody told their story. And I'm sitting with Palestinians, and they're telling me about forced exile and about massacres and all these things that we don't do. We Israelis don't do these things. We're a moral people. We're a moral army. We've made mistakes. We're not perfect. But basically, we don't do these things. And my good fortune was that I was around a group of people, mostly Palestinians, who helped me go through this transformation. It's like learning, I don't know, it's like having your teeth pulled out without anesthesia. It's so painful. You suddenly learn that everything you know is not true. And coming from my background with my family history, that was very painful. But they were very gracious and very generous in the way they kind of led me through this. And I'm forever grateful to that Palestinian community in San Diego for, you know, carrying me along. It took several years. The way now I talk about it like it was easy, but it was very difficult and it took a very long time. And then I became active. And then I started visiting Palestinian communities inside Israel, and I would visit the West Bank, and I began learning more and more about the issue. Would you hit the next one, please? And as I traveled to the West Bank, I would see this. If you've been to Kalandia or any of the major checkpoints, you see the sign. It's about the size of one of these walls. It's a massive sign. And as you can see, it's white letters over a red background, which usually means danger. And of course, it's in Hebrew. And what the sign says is that this road leads to Area A, which is under Palestinian control. And entry to Israelis into Area A is forbidden. It's life-threatening, and it's a felony. And if you notice, there are 2 exclamation marks. So if you're not scared yet, the 2 exclamation marks will probably do the trick. Now you'll also notice that unless you can read Hebrew, this is irrelevant. It's only true if you can read Hebrew. Now, if you see a sign like that, and you have any sense at all, you turn around and go home. Who in his right mind would see a sign that says danger, firing zone, and walk right into it? My good fortune was that I don't have that kind of sense, and that I have many friends who don't have that kind of sense, and we went right through. And I've been going right through these checkpoints and right through that sign every single time I go visit my friends on the other side of the wall. And what's interesting is I always see the same thing. From the very first time all the way to today, it's been several years, every time I cross that wall, every time I cross the sign, I see the exact same thing. I see traffic jams. I see children going to school, which is probably the most common sight in Palestinian areas, is children coming and going to school. I see people going to work. I see shops. I've yet to see the Palestinians that want to kill me. I've yet to see the Palestinians ready with machine guns and tanks and F-16s ready to bomb me because I'm an Israeli. I've yet to see that. And I know that many other Israelis who do this haven't seen it either. And with time, I began to realize that this sign has nothing to do with security. The wall has nothing to do with security. The massive armed Israeli forces along the road have nothing to do with security. The terrorizing and harassment that Palestinian Israelis go through when they go through Tel Aviv airport, the humiliating process that they have to go through, they have to endure every time they decide to leave and go overseas, has nothing to do with security. It has everything to do with racism, with hatred, and with a deep desire to keep us apart, to keep me privileged and them with no rights. That's the name of the game. That's what it's all about. And that's the purpose of the sign. Can you hit the next one, please? Can you read that? Can somebody read that for me?
United Nations Resolution 3013 from 1973 states, the struggles of peoples under colonial and alien domination and racist regimes for the implementation of their right to self-determination and independence is legitimate and in full accordance with the principles of international law.
Legitimate and in full accordance with the principle of international law. This describes the Palestinian struggle. Because that is exactly what Israel is. Now in this picture I stand with my friend Jamal, who sat in Israeli prison for many, many years. In fact, he was given a life sentence, but he was exchanged in one of the prisoner exchanges between Israel and the PLO. And the reason he was given a life sentence is because he killed a soldier. He and 3 others saw 2 young Israeli soldiers guarding a bank in Ramallah, of all things. And soldiers are usually fully armed, of course. And they approached them and they stabbed them to death with a knife. And for that, they were later on, beaten, tortured, and arrested and given life sentences. But when I see the picture of the 2 of us standing side by side, I have to wonder, which one of us is really the terrorist? Because according to this, it's certainly not him. I, on the other hand, served in the Israeli army, an army of occupation, an army of oppression, an army whose sole purpose is to make sure that he does not have a state, he does not have rights, and he dare not resist. So yes, my army has uniforms and commanders and generals, but which one of us is really the terrorist? And finally, and this is also how the book ends, what do? I mean, how do 2 nations share a state? How do they share a country? Well, there are lots of examples. Look at Switzerland. Look at Belgium. These are multinational states. The Swiss are Swiss, the Belgians are Belgians, regardless of what, actual nationality they are beyond that. So there are plenty of examples of states that have multinational nations within them. Once again, going back to this question, is one state the right thing? Is two states the right thing? Are three states the right thing? Somebody gave me something, about a confederation. The reality is that Israel had created a one state. The borders, in terms of from Israeli perspective, are very clear. The borders of the state of Israel are the Jordan River on the east and the Mediterranean on the west. That's it. If you look at Israeli school books, if you look at the weather maps, if you look at any official maps of the state of Israel, it is absolutely clear. There is no question in anybody's mind what the borders of the state of Israel are. That's it. So the notion that there could be an Israeli government that would give up some of that is absolutely absurd. And Israel governs this one state very skillfully with three different sets of laws. You have the laws that govern people like myself, Israeli Jews, who can come and go and say what they please. Pretty much a democratic state for all purposes. You've got the laws that govern the Palestinians who are citizens of Israel, and there are over 30 laws in the law books that discriminate against them specifically, and you've got an entire culture of discrimination against them that is deep-seated and deep-rooted in Israeli society. And then you've got the laws that govern the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, and this is really at the pleasure of the Israeli army. If they want to destroy, they destroy. If they want to arrest and beat, they arrest and beat. If they want to torture, they torture. If they want to kill, they kill. And Palestinians have no recourse. This is the reality. There's an education system, the Zionist education system. Like Judith alluded, my sister just wrote a book about it. She's an educator that teaches racism in a very subtle way. There's a bureaucracy, an entire bureaucracy, that is dedicated to making life impossible for Palestinians through all kinds of restrictions and permits and requirements that are absolutely uncalled for and unnecessary, but are all given and provided under the guise of security. And then you've got the Israeli army, which I like to refer to as one of the best trained, best equipped, best fed terrorist organizations in the world. And yes, they have generals and they have nice uniforms, but their entire purpose is terrorism. And just as one example, I'll give you one example. Almost exactly 4 years ago, as Israel began its attack on Gaza, September the 27th, 2008, at 11:25 in the morning, what I refer to as the most shameful day in the Jewish history, the most shameful day in the history of the Jewish people. Israel began carpet bombing Gaza, and on the first day of what was to be a 21-day attack, they dropped 100 tons of bombs. Okay, a 1-ton bomb will decimate an entire city block. Gaza is one of the most densely populated places in the world. 800,000 children live in Gaza. 11:25 is exactly the time when the morning school shift and the afternoon school shift change. So all the kids are in the streets. All the children are on the streets. That was the moment decided by the decision makers in Israel to begin the attack. This was the first day of a 21-day slaughter that had absolutely no justification. If that's not terrorism, I don't know what is. And this is how the state of Israel manages to control the different populations and somehow still keep up this very sweet, liberal kind of face to everything. But we still have to figure out how we go from here. Well, let's look at what happened in South Africa. They got rid of apartheid. That is the example. What did they do in America? They had got rid of the racist laws that existed in the South. Did the whites in South Africa want this, like this? Absolutely not. Did the whites in the southern states in America, here in the United States want this or like this? No. It was not done by consensus.